Thanks everybody for joining us. I'm Chantal Chung. I'm president of the Kona chapter, but also the project manager of Mauna Community Garden. And I also have the wonderful privilege of working with Dr. Maria Haas whenever I can. She's our presenter this evening. Dr. Haas.
Good evening, everybody. Well, first of all, I just want to thank Katie and the other organizers for inviting me to speak about aquaculture tonight. And of course, Chantal, the amazing Chantal Chung, who's an old colleague and friend. And now we're working together on some aquaponics and aquaculture together. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come here and try to meet everybody now that I'm a member. We do have a couple of very short presentations, if that's okay, if we go ahead and maybe get started with those. Or do we want to talk about anything else first, Chantal?
No, I think we're good. I think everybody's itching to hear all your knowledge. It's going to be wonderful.
And I also just wanted to introduce, I don't know if he's on quite yet, but Daniel Wu is our junior extension specialist over on Oahu, we kind of share his position with the Sea Grant program. He's going to be on at some point, but if you guys are on Oahu and have any questions or want to have anybody come talk to you about aquaculture, Daniel's available several days a week. So yeah, I'll just go ahead and share my screen. But one of the reasons we're here is we do want to make the point that aquaculture is agriculture. And generally, if people are going to get into aquaculture, a lot of times they have an agricultural background, or they start off farming and then they diversify into aquaculture or the aquaponics. And that's, again, one of the reasons we're working closely with Chantal is because she always walks the talk. She's actually doing aquaculture and aquaponics in a very unique way, which I've been thrilled to have a chance to see. But I just wanted to kind of give a short overview of what we're doing with aquaculture right now at the Pacific Aquaculture and Coastal Resources Center where I work, and then and kind of segue a little bit into talking about a new program that we have thanks to USDA, which is our Beginning Farmers and Ranchers Grant. So this is where I work. This is in Keaukaha on the east coast of Hawaii, obviously near Hilo. And this used to be the wastewater treatment plant for Hilo. So around 2000, a whole group of institutions got together and we converted this into an aquaculture research, training, and demonstration center so that we could hopefully move aquaculture in Hawaii forward. Now, of course, you know that on Hawaii, we're really lucky because aside from having this resource, although, it doesn't look that great because it used to be a sewage plant, but we actually can do a lot here because we have these enormous tanks. But we do work closely with the guys on the Kona side at the Nauha Aquaculture Park. So what's our mission? Basically everything has to do with aquaculture we try to do. We are part of the University of Hawai Hilo, so we do a lot of teaching, but we also have extension throughout the state and actually out into the Micronesian islands and American Samoa. So we are kind of small. We have 4 UH positions. We have 12 professional aquaculturists, and we train about 20 to 30 students every year. And those students are actually not just student trainees. They play a true professional role in all our aquaculture efforts. And we couldn't do without them because otherwise we are very small. And we're of course very lucky that we have a lot of gifted and talented students. I should mention that we are part of the UH College of Agriculture, Forestry, and Natural Resource Management. I suspect some of you guys are probably graduates or maybe spent some time with us. But we do have relationships with a lot of the community colleges throughout the other islands as well. I should point out, we are actually the only place in all of the Pacific Islands where you can actually get a 4-year specialization in aquaculture. So if you know folks that want to study aquaculture or marine science, which is obviously closely related to aquaculture in the case of Hawaii, I think we're a great place to come. So that's my little plug for UH Hilo. So one of the things I'm going to talk about a little bit is our aquaculture student workforce training program. This is a program that we really put a lot of effort into. And the goal of this program is essentially to get students early on in their careers, maybe as freshmen or sophomores. And so we can get them between 1 and 2 years of really solid professional level aquaculture training. So as soon as they graduate, or maybe even during the summer, they kind of have a lot of good opportunities with the aquaculture farms, maybe over at Nauha or wherever they're from. And I wanted to point out that we're not exactly an internship program. The workforce training is substantially different than the internships, mainly because we don't want to replicate all the great internship programs that are happening around Hawaii. But we also, again, we want to make sure they can have 1 or 2 years of really good experience so they can hopefully step into fairly high level jobs in companies or nonprofits or the government, or if they actually want to start their own farm, they're going to have a pretty solid technical base to do that. And we have had several students partner up with other people and start their own farms. So we do research, but we're not very theoretical type of researchers. We're very applied researchers, and we're trying to answer questions that will solve hopefully real world problems for producers and farmers. One of the things we do is try to come up with small model production systems for farmers, because we know that a lot of people want to get into aquaculture, but not everybody has $1 million in their back pocket to set up a huge bunch of infrastructure. So we're looking for small, compact, and hopefully inexpensive systems that people could potentially operate on their own, either as a small family business or maybe a small partnership of some kind. Our main focus areas are shellfish, fish, and limu. And that makes me think of the limu emu. I think of limu every time I hear a Liberty Mutual advertisement, so I always have to smile. Although I don't think the emu is eating limu, but that's just being silly. One of the things that we're actually really interested in right now is trying to work on developing native fish species for consumption and for culture. So we have quite a few native species of fish in Hawaii, and I think you guys are all familiar with a lot of these, I know. But the reality is, except for moi is one of the few native fish species in Hawaii that's actually been developed almost fully for aquaculture. We have a lot of other good candidates like mullet. So mullet are famous for being one of the most desired species to grow in fish ponds and harvest from the Hawaiian fish ponds. Yet, despite many decades of research, nobody's really producing mullet right now. And there's a tremendous need from the local IA practitioners, because one of the things they're doing as citizen scientists is actually documenting the decline of our native mullet stocks. And that's a problem because they depend on the natural recruitment of mullet. There is a big demand right now to produce mullet in hatcheries. So we're trying to work with this fish. It's actually a very difficult fish to reproduce in captivity, but we're working with some of the other popular food fish species. We also have another program that's designed to develop captive breeding methods for the marine ornamental fish that we find here in Hawaii. You're probably familiar with what the Oceanic Institute has done with the yellow tang reproduction. So we're kind of following in their path. Right now, commercial collection of ornamental fish has been banned in Hawaii. So there's really not a good source of these fish. Yet we need to develop captive methods for them because it's a potential source of income for people who want to do this, but also just to learn more about their basic biology. If we want to be able to do conservation and management, there's not a lot known about some of these fish. So I'm just on the bottom here, you might just be interested to see this is what these fish eggs look like when they're just about to hatch on the left-hand side. That little glob in there, that's actually an oil droplet. That's their energy source while they're in the egg. And then on the right-hand side, that is actually a little Hawaiian flame wrasse that just barely hatched out. And you can see that little oil globlet there. And you can see that little guy doesn't even have a mouth or an eye yet. And this is actually one of the big problems with these Hawaiian ornamental fish is they're not well developed when they hatch out. So we have to take really good care of them and find interesting little teeny tiny microorganisms for them to eat. But this is one of the things that's really captivated I think, attention of our students and some of the other trainees. So one of the things we are doing, and I'll talk a little bit about this more when we get to our USDA project, is actually trying to be a seed source for people that want things like tilapia, catfish, or a hole, so they can grow them in ponds, freshwater or brackish ponds, or even the aquaponics systems. And I got to give a shout out to Chantal, because she's the one that inspired us to look at a hole, because she's already worked with them. So based on her little nugget of inspiration, we've been actually growing a hole at the Aquaculture Center, and we can get them down to almost freshwater. Not quite yet, but we're getting there. And she'll talk a little bit more about that. But we see this fish as being kind of like the new tilapia for Hawaii, because we know a lot of people don't want to grow tilapia, even though it's a great fish to grow. So it kind of gives us a little opportunity to diversify our freshwater aquaculture here in Hawaii. So live feeds. So one thing a lot of people don't know is there's been a big clamor lately to build a whole bunch of hatcheries around the islands, mostly to produce marine fish. But people don't necessarily understand that we actually have to grow a lot of microalgae. So this is microalgae here being grown outside. We have to grow about 10,000 liters a day just to feed our baby fish and our baby oysters. And things like copepods, which is this little organism you see over here. So this is a big training area for our students as well, because these kind of jobs are some of the highest paid jobs in aquaculture right now. So about 12 years ago, we also got on the path of seeing if we could start doing shellfish culture in the local IA, because they are very good places for it in general, partly because they have very high nutrient levels in their water, partly because of terrestrial runoff. So we also have a large shellfish hatchery. We employ almost 100% students. They raise seed, and then we actually sell it to about 30 shellfish producers in Hawaii and the US. A lot of people don't know that about 80% of the shellfish seed that's grown on the west coast of the mainland actually comes from Hawaii. Not from us, we're very small, but the Kona hatcheries are quite large, and the whole west coast depends on the Kona hatcheries to supply them. And of course, we do a variety of other types of research with our students. But this just shows what an oyster hatchery looks like. But again, the other thing we're doing is that we're also trying to look at the native species of bivalves here in Hawaii to see what we could grow here instead of using non-native species. So we have a second shellfish hatchery here, our little tiny one, where we're doing things like, this is the native oyster from Hawaii. This is probably, you can see it's a pearl oyster. This is a pen shell, but these are all edible. They're all native species and they all have economic potential. So we're trying to work out the methods for these, and of course, find good sites in hopefully nearshore areas around Hawaii where people could be producing these species. And then limu, the famous limu. So this is the work of actually Dr. Carla McDermott, who is our marine science professor, who is a specialist in seaweed. And so we've developed methods to kind of do almost semi-commercial aquaculture of 3 or 4 different native species of seaweed. One of our goals is to try to ramp this up and get to a more of a commercial level scale, but hopefully involving some other people that want to grow these things. So for example, this is sea grapes. As far as we know, this doesn't have a Hawaiian name, but it's very popular with a lot of island folks and people from Southeast Asia. You can actually grow this in 5-gallon buckets in your backyard. We've done this with school kids. This is Lepeohina halamina. This is another really wonderful seaweed to eat. We're looking at this as possibly being maybe an ogo or a nori replacement. But this is an area where I think people who already grow plants, this is a place where, you know, this might be something you might be interested in testing at some point. We also have a little teeny tiny farm. We call it a farm. It's more like a demonstration site, but it's in Hilo Bay. You know, Hilo Bay is kind of famously polluted because we get a lot of nutrient runoff from the landscape. Grows a lot of microalgae in the bay, and then we have a nutrient plume that goes up and affects the North Hamakua coast. So we're looking at using bivalves like pearl oysters, native oysters, and of course the limu to do some environmental mitigation because they can directly uptake nutrients from the water. But we also want to show that you can do very small scale nearshore farming in Hawaii in a feasible and environmentally sustainable way. And so far it's worked out pretty well. So coming to the Beginning Farmers and Ranchers development program that we have, and this is where Chantal is our strong partner, including her wonderful community garden. I should say that the lead on this is actually an institution called the Marine and Environmental Research Institute of Ponape, MERIP for short, and our principal investigator is Simon Ellis, who actually lives on Kauai right now. So if you've never been to Ponape, this is what it looks like. It's a gorgeous, beautiful island, very remote from here. This is the MERIP lab where they do things like corals, giant clams, pearl oysters, and we're also providing service to American Samoa, although it's been, of course, difficult to work in the islands since they've been basically closed off because of COVID. So we got the first grant in 2019, just before COVID hit. These were kind of our general goals. We were hoping to increase the number of aquaculture farmers throughout the Pacific region, but of course in Hawaii too. We were also hoping to be able to help people scale up. So we have a lot of small producers, particularly in the other islands. They're very small, so scaling up is important. And again, one of the things that kind of got scuttled by COVID was this idea of doing cross-visit exchanges so we could exchange lessons learned with our other island colleagues, because there are certain things you can do in places like Ponape that unfortunately we can't do here, largely because of regulation, but we can pilot it in Ponape. For example, coral culture, which is actually very lucrative for the people who do it in Ponape. And then, of course, developing training materials. In Hawaii, so we actually got some supplemental funding for COVID relief in 2020. So this is where we got into the field of hopefully expanding the capability of providing seed for freshwater food fish, the tilapia, the catfish, and the hole, hopefully. we're working with some folks over at the Ha'ia fish pond to reactivate a solar powered Fluxy. So Fluxy is actually an upwelling nursery system where you take small shellfish seed and grow it out in the field. So we're going to be sending very small seed to Ha'ia. They're going to grow in their upweller system and hopefully distribute to other areas that want larger seed. We're going to be providing a range of training and extension to help people do permitting. I'm sure you guys all know that permitting is a problem. It's a problem for ag, but it's definitely a huge problem for aquaculture. We're doing water quality training, and then we're going to do a series of courses, which I'll talk about in a second. I do want to mention we have some small stipends available for aquaculture farmers. So if you're interested in that, we can talk about that later, but it's going to be linked to the training courses. So again, focusing on some of these species in Hawaii, but this is our schedule of the training courses that we're hoping to get started. So back in the day when Sea Grant and UH had, I think, 5 extension agents, aquaculture extension agents all through the islands, they used to do the Getting Started in Aquaculture course every quarter, and it was really, really popular, but that hasn't been done for, I think, almost 10 years. So we're reviving this Getting Started in Aquaculture course. It's just going to be a couple hours, maybe one day every quarter. And this is just to give people an introduction to what needs to be done to get started in aquaculture. You know, some of the pros, some of the cons. And then we're going to have a 3-part series of how to do fish culture. That's going to be led by Dr. Kevin Fitzsimmons. He's with the University of Arizona, but he's actually done a lot of work in Molokai in the past, in fact, with limu culture of all things. Then we have Rhiannon Chandler Yao. Rhiannon is a lawyer who specializes in water and aquaculture law. She's going to be talking about how to get aquaculture permits. And then Rhiannon and I will do a series on shellfish culture and restorative aquaculture and oyster gardening. There's actually about 10 sites in Hawaii right now where we're using native oysters for water quality mitigation purposes. So that's what the oyster gardening refers to. I just want to thank our many, many collaborators, but again, of course, Chantal, because she's been such a great supporter of all this. And I think I'll turn it over to Chantal right now because she's got some interesting things to show you from what she's done at her garden. Thanks, Chantal.
Okay. I'll try and share my screen while I'm trying to do that. Thank you so much to Dr. Haas. There was a question in the chat about curriculum. Have you documented the small scale growth of the sea grapes with students as a resource that teachers can access?
No, we haven't documented yet. We're trying to actually put out a series of little short brochures on how to grow these different species of limu. So our collaborators are educators from Kaumeke. So we're going to hopefully be doing that. But yeah, that's a great question. As soon as we have something, we'll try to get it out to everybody.
Okay, share my screen if I can. There it is. Okay, so this is an aerial view of our system at Mo'ona. It's a 3,400 gallon cement tank, no plastic liner. We followed a design out of India, actually. So primarily what we do at Mo'ona is find out. We see something and we want to try it. It's a real low risk environment. And we realize about 90% of the time, ooh, that does not work. Okay, go again. And so what you're looking at in the middle is the accumulator. Oops. Nope. I know, I could watch that over and over again, but let's not. So you can see that it's made out of cement. We wanted to see if it would work. We wanted to see if we could run it off grid. We want about it's giving me a Uh-oh.
Chantal, we're having trouble hearing you. Oh no. No sound. I wonder what's going wrong.
Okay.
You're back.
Yay! Oh, sorry, technical difficulties. Okay, still going? New laptop. Sometimes it just X's me out. Anyway, I was just talking about how we're providing a demonstration place, a place to prove concepts out. Can you fill a 3,400 gallon tank with just rainwater catchment? Yes, you can. Does that affect the pH? Does the cement affect the pH? Does the rainwater affect the pH? Are there ways that you can fix that? Yes, there is. And can you also run it all on solar? Yes, we can. Right. And so finding low cost, low environmental impact ways to do more, to grow more food. That's the main point at Mo'ona. And I can't take credit for Maria so generous. She gave me credit for the idea of the ohole, but that actually comes from the book Native Planters. I happen to be reading the book by Mary Kavena Pukui, page 262, in case y'all are interested. Halfway down the page, it starts talking about the fish that were in the upland lo'i. So the freshwater ponds up Mauka. So they were the ama, which is the mullet, the ahole, and then the ava, the milkfish. So that started itching my brain and thinking about it. And we did several experiments with students in grades 3rd through 8th at Bishop Museum, Amy Greenwald's Botanical Garden. We found that yes, we can indeed take ahole all the way down to 0 parts per salinity, parts per thousand salinity. From 32 parts per thousand, we got them in a tide pool. So we thought, that proves the historical record. How can we go bigger? So we had to wait a few years to go bigger, raise the money. We made emu many times to raise the money to and have private donations to raise the money to do the tank. So again, just to show that it works. And so the parallel experiments, of course, the work that Maria is doing is much, much bigger. We're very tiny, but our part is to see about how can we use ahole inside of aquaponics. But I didn't want to take up too much time. I want to open it up for questions because you have access to the amazing Dr. Hawes.
I see there's a question from Michelle Quick about where you can get tilapia babies. Where are you located, Michelle? On Maui. I would contact, okay, so there's a problem. We can provide on the Big Island, but because of plant quarantine regulations, it's difficult to get permits to move tilapia around. I would suggest contacting Maui College. They have a great aquaponics program. I forget, it's Nicolette, I forget her last name, maybe Chantal remembers, but if you send me your email, I can get you in touch with them. They could probably supply you with some tilapia fry.
And then the next question was, how do we sign up for all of those classes? Katie Zuber will be sending an email out announcing the classes through the weekly newsletter, but you can also sign up by sending your email address and expressing your interest in that too. I'm putting my email in the chat. And we'll add you to the list for the workshops.
Yep, that's the contact from Alyssa Nicolette Vanderlee. She is fabulous. Also, for the person asking about Kona, we can supply some in Kona. It kind of depends on how many you want. And one thing I want to clarify about tilapia is it doesn't seem like in Hawaii people are doing monosex culture. So most commercial producers with tilapia will make sure they're only culturing males, because if you only culture males, you don't have over reproduction in your pond. The males grow a lot faster. So there's different ways to get all male, but the easiest way to do it is you can just actually look at their external anatomy and tell if they're male or female once they get to a certain size. So once you learn how to do that, you can sex your own fish and make sure you're only growing males. And then if you want to produce your own seed, it's better to set up your own broodstock tank or broodstock pond. So so a lot of people like in aquaponics are having both sex in their aquaponics systems, and usually that just leads to really stunted fish and over reproduction. So I just wanted to mention that sexing technique for people who might not know about it.
And will we be covering the sexing technique inside of the workshops? I feel
We
like
will.
we will. All right.
And if people want to come see us, we can teach them. And there's lots online all about it. You know, it's not 100%, but once they get to about thumb size, pretty much anybody, if you have somewhat decent vision, which I don't anymore, but you can tell the difference. And then Sylvia, is it Sylvia's next question about aquaponics on Kauai, fish and seaweed? I don't know. Do you know anybody doing aquaponics on Kauai, Chantal?
No, I don't know anyone off the top of my head. I knew that they were doing a few things in Hawaiian homes. I know Palika was doing a few experiments, but I don't know about larger scale than just workshops.
I do know that, well, so Simon Ellis, who's actually the head of our Beginning Farmers Project, he is located on Kauai and can provide some advice. Also, there's David Anderson, who's at the Nomilo fish pond. I think it's called Kauai Sea Farms. He could probably advise on that as well. He's doing fish, shellfish, and I think they're starting to do limu in the pond as well.
Ooh, we have a question back. From Wayne, what can you feed your tilapia?
What do we feed our tilapia? Yeah, we just feed cat food feed.
And is that available? Like I get our feed that I'm experimenting, the Aquamax catfish feed from our local feed store. If an operator is it pretty much locally available, or sorry, I'm asking for questions. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, you could definitely, we can arrange a visit for you, Sylvia, or anybody else that wants to come visit Pack Rack. Best thing to do is email me and we can get you set up with a tour or visit. The only thing I have to mention is, at least right now, because it's a state property, is you do have to be fully vaccinated. But yeah, if you just don't mind emailing me, and I will put my email in the chat here. I did want to mention about feed. So since tilapia have kind of a low protein requirement among fish, you could probably feed them almost any fish food, but there's also a lot of interest in looking at developing local feeds. So they will actually eat vegetable scraps, they'll eat dog food, they'll eat cat food, they'll eat almost anything you throw in their tank. They don't necessarily grow as quickly, but you can use a combination of artificial feed, the pelleted feed, and you could use other types of feed as well. Yep, it's PACRA, Pacific Aquaculture and Coastal Resources Center, and we're located in Keaukaha in Hilo. Okay, we are growing a holy, but we're not producing very many right now just because we don't have a lot of money. We're hoping that when we get our next grant, we can actually start producing fingerlings to help get them out to folks that want to do it. Chantel's going to get the first batch just because she's the one that gave us that idea, and she's testing them in her system, and she's really good at that. But yes, I think by the end of the year, we're going to have some for people to at least test in their systems or their ponds. So hopefully we can just keep in touch on that.
But again, applied research, to see what can do, right? Instead of always going, well, we haven't done that before, so we're not going to do it. Okay. Better to try it and find out. Maybe it could be a wonderful thing, could be a fizzle, but best to try it. I wanted to cycle back to the soil and chicken manure question for fish. In my humble opinion, if you put soil and chicken manure in with your fish, you're going to ruin your water quality. But that's just me. I'll redirect to Dr. Haas.
Now, you do have to be careful with those kind of fertilizers. People who use earthen ponds will use a variety of organic fertilizers, manures of various types, or even like plant compost, because you're going to fertilize the ponds. So you create a phytoplankton bloom, zooplankton then eat the phytoplankton, and your tilapia can eat that. Also, a lot of species of tilapia, they actually have a modification of their gills. It's called a gill breaker. It's like a little filament that they can actually sort of sieve the microalgae out of the water. So that's why we fertilize a lot of tilapia pond water pretty heavily, because they can be semi-dependent on that, especially when they're small. And it's actually a very nutritional food source, so you can feed less artificial feed. But you can experiment. But the difficulty with non-standard, like non-pelleted feed, is you just might not get as good a growth, and you do have to keep an eye on the water quality, like Chantal is saying. So being able to monitor and manage your water quality is pretty important before you start kind of messing around with other methods, basically. Oh, duckweed. Yeah, duckweed. They love duckweed.
My fish eat all of my duckweed. I have to keep a separate tank. I kept putting in.
They'll gobble it up.
I had Azola too. Oh no, they busted that up. I was so sad. It was because Azola is so pretty. That was the end. Piggy fish.
Oh, limu starters on Oahu. I would try Uncle Wally Ito. He's part of the Limu Hui, which is part of Kua, but he's got a little setup over in Sand Island at the DAR, the Anui Nui. He would be a great guy. He's got all kinds of seaweed that he gives out starts to people all the time. And zooplankton, no, you don't need to, you can't really, it's very difficult to buy the zooplankton. You can culture them, but at least for tilapia, you don't really need to do that. As long as you're fertilizing your system, you're probably going to get zooplankton growing in there. And then some people actually do it in buckets, especially for baby fish. So you can start these, what we call green water cultures. And this is actually where manure is super, like cattle manure. Get a bunch of 5-gallon buckets, fertilize them with cow manure, you let it age, and then you find a hobbyist that's got what they call moina or basically daphnia or water fleas. So you get a culture from somebody who has them, and you can actually buy a mill, or and once that manure water combination has aged a bit, you seed it with these moina cultures, and they will just bloom prolifically. And that is actually a wonderful feed for baby fish of all kinds. You probably can't grow enough to really support your adult fish, but for babies, it's fantastic.
Oh, now you're gonna make me go chase a cow.
The trout farm on Maui, I know very little. I'm Facebook friends with the owner, so I see them harvesting watercress and trout, but I don't know much about it. Maybe somebody else knows more.
I could be wrong, but do trout need a certain temperature? The lower temperature, is that true?
Yeah, they need cold water. And in fact, I believe that person has to chill their water. Now, if you go high enough up, and back in the old days on Hawaii Island, they used to have trout in the cane flumes. Because if you go up high enough here, your water's cold enough, but you have to be 17 degrees Celsius or lower. So that's actually like in the 60s Fahrenheit. And can you, Can you use wild caught or holy? And do they have to be acclimated to zero salinity? So there's actually two species of a holy here. And thing is there's not a lot known about, there's a lot of traditional knowledge, but there's certain things that no one's ever looked at in terms of like what their salinity tolerance actually is. And it's thought that one species is more tolerant to fresh water than the other species. So in theory, yeah, you can do that, but you have to be really careful when you get almost to the end of when you're almost purely fresh water. If you don't have enough alkalinity in your water, they're probably going to die. So that's one of the things we're trying to actually experiment with, to see what level of alkalinity do we have to have in the water so they can survive getting down to zero. Because we have killed a few by using very pure well water, and there probably was not enough alkalinity for them to survive in that 0 parts per thousand. But we're working on it.
Oh, there is an update. There's 2 in the tank now, in the aquaponics tank, swimming around. Little ones though, so I'm very pleased.
Well, you've had mullet in your tanks before too, right?
Yep. But they haven't done as well as the ahole. I found that the ahole are just, and it's more the zebra, the ones with the more of the color across their face. Those seem to do incredibly well.
Well, the other thing about them is that they do eat a lot of insects, especially when they're young. So, you know, we've talked a lot about using worms or black soldier fly, or just, I think honestly, some tilapia farmers just hang light bulbs over their tanks at night, and the tilapia will eat the mosquitoes or anything else that come to the light. So there's I think there's possibilities there.
Oh, are the fish healthier generally in brackish water? From Lyman and Mickey.
It's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. That's kind of what our trials are going to be about, just to see if one, can we acclimate them? How do they do? Do they grow faster? Do they grow slower? What kind of alternative feeds can we give them? And, you know, it's a whole new species. So this is where hopefully people can get involved with some of these trials with us. Oh, I see Kathleen McGovern Hopkins is on. She's definitely an aquaculture expert. So if you folks know her, you can always pick her brain for advice. I'm looking for Wally Ito's email, and I'll try to put it in the chat.
Oh, there's a comment from Michelle Quick. Kula Haven has to pay almost $4,000 a month on electric to chill water in the summer. Yes. So electricity, that's one of the reasons we're experimenting with the solar array pumps and different ways to make the electricity all off grid to reduce the costs. So we'll see how the panel to pump to battery and the timer, how that all works out off grid. And we're documenting every part of it so we can create a lower cost alternative. Sure, Maya, can ahole be easily bred? We do not know.
Well, we've been surprised. We you know, a lot of these marine fish have to be induced to spawn with hormone injections, like mullet. Mullet require that. That's one reason mullet's famously hard. But our ahole they just breed every couple of weeks. They go into a breeding frenzy for a couple of nights, and then they'll stop, but they start again. And it doesn't seem, we don't see it related to the moon cycle, because we have moi right next to them, and they definitely, even though they're not exposed to natural light, they obviously can sense the moon cycles because they do go on the moon cycle. So I think that might be one reason ahole might be kind of an easier fish than some of the other ones. But again, it's early days. We're just getting started with these little guys.
But they're so tasty. So tasty. That's the motivation for me. Sorry if anybody has a scientific interest. My mouth has an interest in ahole. From Sylvia, can you use worm castings and tea as fertilizer to grow fish food?
I think you could fertilize with that. You just have to give it a shot and see how it goes. You know, I think if people are interested in a holy, if you can catch some wild ones and try them in your own systems, your own ponds, your own aquaponic systems, I mean, you got to do it slowly, but I think it'd be great for people to try it. Maybe we can team up to do some trials together, because we're just a few people, but if we can get other people with us, we can really go crazy on the applied research and figure this out a lot quicker for everybody.
The first trials that we did at Bishop Museum were wild caught. So we had gone down to a place that I knew had freshwater outflow, Algae Bay, and gotten them there. So the salinity was just a tad lower than it would be in the open ocean. And the temperature matched more closely the tank we have at Mauka, and I did it in an aquarium. So we finally got two Hole to get to about a little over 6 inches. Their names were Fat Boy and Chum Chum. And then I went off to a 3-day workshop in Waimea, and my pump malfunctioned, and 2 years of research fish went belly up, and I was very upset. So I'm eager to, right now we're getting ready to duplicate the experiment at Moana. So fingers crossed. That's a good question. Hole, how long to maturity? Oh, and he's in on the experiment. Let's do it.
You know, I tried to look that up in the literature, and the only reference I could really find was it's usually its size when they talk about reproductive maturity. So it looks like around 4 to 6 inches they start entering reproductive stages, but we don't really know. So that's another thing we're tracking, because our first generation of babies is getting up to about 4 inches. And we're not seeing them spawn, but we're starting to see kind of like spawning like behaviors with them. So we're trying to track that. I'm guessing fishermen would know better, because obviously if you're catching and you cut them open and they're right, you would know. So I think fishermen would know better than I would.
Then what plants are best for fish food, specifically tilapia? That's from Wayne.
I think the duckweed is a good one. Basically, I mean, tilapia will eat almost anything. It's really more of a question is are you supplying them with enough protein to grow? Because they do have to have a certain level of protein. So you can use some plant sources. I mean, you could use insects too, but again, if you're going to do it large scale, you're probably going to have to start off with artificial feed until you can develop your own other food source. I don't know, what has anybody else tried other plant sources?
I found ground up ulu and kalo. It might sound weird, but the fish really love it. They really love it. So I want to see if I can mix that with something else to get the protein. But I was so surprised they really attacked it. The kids just threw it into the tank for, fun, and they really loved it. So I put it in as treats. Oh gosh, dead chickens. Oh, that's from lettuce, leafy greens. Okay.
Yeah, they'll eat all kinds of stuff. It's just a question of how quickly do you want them to grow, and are you getting them enough protein so they can grow quickly? But just try it. I mean, it doesn't hurt to try it on a few. I mean, you have nothing to lose, really. Oh, breeding some kind of insect. So that's where the worms and the black soldier fly is where a lot of people are putting, actually a lot of research efforts going into that right now.
And black soldier flies are plentiful. They reproduce like crazy. And if you have the right setup, they literally harvest themselves. It's crazy. And they're fat.
So Lyman and Mickey are commenting that tilapia are bony. And that is true, but so are holy, and so are mullet. So I don't care. But I will tell you one thing. One thing we used to do when we were in the Peace Corps is we had this problem that we were working with farmers, small scale farmers, doing earthen ponds with tilapia. And so we did teach them how to sex the tilapia. But what do you do with the female fish? Because you don't want to put them back in your pond. So we made tilapia chips. So we would take these little thumb-sized female tilapia, and they would deep fry them. They'd kind of slice them a little bit, deep fry them, and then salt them, and they make super crunchy tilapia chips, which are delicious. So if you got too small, too bony tilapia, just fry the heck out of them. They're still really good.
Oh, we do that with ballyhoo. Oh, okay. Next question from Lyman and Mickey is, are there native fish that are algae eaters, non-carnivorous?
Yeah, well, mullet, milkfish are largely plant eaters. What else? There's a few out there like manini tend to pick a lot of algae. There's a number of them. Most fish are going to fall into the omnivorous category where they're going to eat, a little bit of everything. Oh, Kole. Well, there's things like Kole, of course. They're pretty vegetarian, although we're not experimenting with them for aquaculture yet.
Then there's new user, one farm, 250, 55-gallon drums, but fish and chickens can eat them all up. Was that a question? Or no? Oh, is that new user? Is that the black soldier flies? Got it. Okay. Yeah, they're amazing. They're amazing composters. I have yet to throw them in the fish tank though. I'm waiting to see that. Have food processor will travel. Oh yeah, I'm gonna put them through the food processor, a little bit of ulu, and we're gonna see about this.
Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, the question about the algae eaters is Neinui. So we are working with Neinui. We didn't grow them ourselves. We got them as baby fry from a company called Ocean Era that's over in Kona. And they're actually starting to send them to some of the fish ponds around the state. So those guys love seaweed. I mean, we've just found them tons of seaweed. And actually we found that even if you're feeding them pellets, if you just offer them a little seaweed every day, they actually grow about 10 to 20% quicker than fish that just get pellets. And it can't be the calories, because we weren't giving them enough extra seaweed to give them a lot of extra calories. There seems to be some idea that, and this is actually, there's stuff in the literature about seaweed acting as a probiotic with some fish species, helping them grow faster and maybe digesting better. It's not really clear how it works, but a lot of fish do seem to be better if they get a little bit of lingu in their diet. Oh, minerals too. Yeah, it could be minerals.
While people are thinking of questions, how do you feel our food system can benefit from more people integrating aquaculture and aquaponics on their farms?
Chantal, I'm sure you have an opinion on that.
I always have an opinion, but I mean, there are examples. I think it was Kai Fox.
Yeah, sorry, let me give me a couple seconds. I'll get emails to folks.
Okay.
Well, in terms of integrating aquaculture with farms, first of all, I think it's a really good idea if you have the time to do it, because honestly, everything takes time, as you know, as farmers. I have some doubts about some of the aquaponics systems that people are using, because we do see a lot of people just building systems. People get super enthusiastic about aquaponics, and then they abandon the aquaponics because they find out that they try to balance the system for the fish, but then they got to balance the system for the vegetables or whatever they're growing as plants. And that actually is a challenge. It's a challenge even for people who, in theory, are well qualified to do it. I mean, I've run a couple of large aquaponics systems, and I found it very hard to keep the system balanced. I actually think it's better to do what they call decoupling, where you grow the fish in a separate system, but you can still use the effluent water to fertilize your plants. And there's always hydroponics. You don't have to have fish in there. Hydroponics works pretty well in a lot of cases too. So I think it's kind of better to start simple and build your way up. And personally, if I was going to get back into it, and of course we kind of are, I would not have a coupled aquaponics system right off the bat personally. But, okay, sorry.
It's not without its. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
I think it's not without its. People should go into it with their eyes open. It is a fairly technical thing, but I like to think of it as adult Legos, and it's an adventure, right? I love it. oh my gosh, my sedimentation tank, something's wrong with it. Sweet. I get to figure that out, take it apart, put it back together. It's one of my favorite things. You know, thinking about the flow of water, so systems thinking. So I'm a weirdo like that. Oh, do you accept voice questions? Kevin. Huh? I guess so.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
Can't spell, can't type, and so I don't want any record of my punctuations. Along with being a farmer, as you can see in the back of me is my nursery, and hope to use kind of a combination of aquaponics and fruit trees. But I'm also a fisherman, and I was really excited when you said you like a holy. That is my favorite fish. So thank you. They're oh no, yeah. And the nice thing is, although they have bones, the bones stick together, and you can take the meat off really easy. I'm an avid fisherman, and I just came back from Minnesota, where I believe the Department of Land and Natural Resources, and I asked the question twice, but I think they release 250 million fish every year into lakes and streams so that anglers have an opportunity to catch fish. And shoreline fishing is very popular, and holy, mullet, moi are also game fish. Is there any avenue for people who are raising fish in, I guess, ponds to partner with the state to release them into the ocean so that individuals who are fishing along the shoreline might have a higher probability of catching fish?
That's an excellent question. One thing that I think a lot of people are starting to think about again now in Hawaii is the fisheries stock enhancement, because Hawaii did have a pretty big stock enhancement program decades ago. That's what the Nui Nui's Fisheries Research Center was originally built for. And it was kind of discontinued, I think mainly because of, financial concerns. But here in Hilo, DAR had a big mullet stock enhancement program. In fact, at one point, the hatchery produced mullet were actually a pretty big component of the fishery, the recreational fishery. Mm-hmm. So there was just there's a bill in the legislature right now to try to revive that program. Now, whether the state will ever get to the point where they would let individuals grow fish and release them, I don't know. I see that as kind of far-fetched given our state's reluctant to try anything new. But yeah. I mean, it's not out of the question.
Yeah, and I guess along those lines is, when I go to the boat launch, I see the stickers on people's trailers. Basically, they're paying a boat launch fee. There's proposal to charge people for fishing in the ocean, but it's a two-way street. Charging people for what God has provided us is kind of one thing, but charging us for stocking programs that are actively being done throughout the country so that a fisherman has the opportunity to catch things. And I guess I'm just amazed at the way fisheries in Alaska and other states release salmon, and they swim right back into the hatchery, and it's like, wow, it's like magic. But it seems to be such a very effective way to help supplement people's food. And when you talk about the state being reluctant to do things, you're right. It seems like we should be leading, but not kind of looking at what's being done throughout the world. And although it's probably politically unacceptable even to suggest this, I believe yellow tangs are being raised in captivity. And it seems like rather than closing the tropical aquarium industry, it would be amazing if we supplemented it so that it would be a sustainable resource, but it seems too much I see things being closed, not actually artificial reefs being, opened up, or avenues to create more opportunities for fishermen. And there are a lot of people along the coastline, so I don't know. And what better place to raise fish than in the ocean, so yeah, thank you, for letting me vent. Okay.
No, I think the same kind of way, but one of the big problems with stock enhancement for us is we don't have anything like salmon. I mean, salmon and trout are kind of relatively easy to raise in large amounts in hatcheries, and almost anybody can do it. But these marine fish that we value are tremendously difficult to raise. So for example, Oceanic Institute with their yellow tangs, even though they have world-class experts there, it's still taken them over 20 years to get to the point where they're producing what you might consider semi-commercial quantities of yellow tang. We're talking about a couple of dozen at a time that they get to the point where they can sell them. So it's a huge, huge challenge. I think on the food fish side, like the ahole, the moi, possibly mullet, because they did do mullet again in large quantities years ago, that those kind of things could be revived. I think we might have to do it. You know, this information that Kua and some of the fish pond folks are collecting show that the mullet, particularly like places like Hilo and some of the other locations, are really drastically reduced in their populations. So I think it'll be interesting to see. I think they're getting ready to release some more of their results, perhaps. But DAR tracks it, but obviously mullet at least is really down. So yeah, good thoughts for the future. Maybe we'll see a stock enhancement program in the next, I don't know, 2, 3 years, 5 years.
Yeah,
Who
hopefully it's within our lifetime. So.
And we had another question from Anissa. Is anyone farming crawfish that you know of?
Well, you folks might know better than I. The only one I ever knew of was one up in Hamakua when the Hamakua Gulch was operational. There was somebody that was growing them in an old rice paddy. Don't think they do it anymore. But there's potential to do that. And they're out in the streams. So no, I don't know of anybody doing it, maybe unless somebody else knows.
And then what's the bill number? New user, what? Is there a specific bill?
Oh, is that for the legislative bill for the stock enhancement?
But they're supplying blue dragons. You can buy pounds for stocking. I don't know.
No, I don't either.
Yes. There was a comment in the chat. Oh wait. Aquaponics provides great opportunities to create food security for local families and communities, especially when drought season comes around on Molokai and water needs to be conserved. So that's one of the things that we want to demonstrate at Maona is how to combine those two practices, rainwater catchment, water conservation, and aquaculture and aquaponics. It's one of those ways that all of our roof water gets filtered through. It doesn't go directly into the fish tank because don't do that. That's not good. That'll make your pH go chicken wampus and your fish will be sad. But we'll put it through our grow beds to filter. But our tank was 100% filled with rainwater catchment using zero county water. And it's a great way to be catching water and conserving water and being more conscious of our water resources, because water is the new oil. So
that's a good point. But do you ever get problems with the water being acidified because of fog?
Nope, not lately. I think if we had started it up 2 years ago, yes, there would have been more bog in the water. But I have, knock on wood, have had really great 6.5s and 7 pHs. So now that I've said something, it'll get all messed up. But we've been lucky so far. And I think it has to do a lot with the tank and the type of plants. We'll have to narrow it down to see what's working well. Oh, here we go. Here's a question from Sylvia. Can we speak to any negative environmental impacts from aquaponics? Or how was the question, how does the environment negatively impact aquaponics or the other? Oh, no. Okay. Are there negative?
It's more, sorry, this is Sylvia. It's more like people who don't know what they're doing, raising the wrong kind of thing and releasing it somewhere where they shouldn't. Like you're talking about rice paddies and crawfish. Like I wouldn't know if that's a good or a bad thing to do. You know, like for the natural environment that exists, like they brought guinea grass over here and look at it now. So I'm just curious if you know anything about that.
Well, I would say that we should be very careful not to be moving stuff around, even the non-native species. I mean, they're not all the non-native species are in all watersheds. So if we don't, for example, tilapia, I mean, that's one of the big beefs that people have about tilapia is that they're considered to be invasive. I don't think they're necessarily truly invasive, but the problem is if you move them into a body of water where the predators have been wiped out, the tilapia will definitely take over. They're very opportunistic. And that's one reason the state puts a lot of restrictions on importing new tilapia, but they don't put very many restrictions on moving them around within Hawaii. So I think one of the things that should be done is we should be identifying the watersheds where tilapia is not present and making sure people don't move tilapia into those areas. I don't think it hurts to farm tilapia. If your river is already full of tilapia, aquaculture is not going to change that in any way. But we don't want to be moving tilapia or even crawfish around because crawfish are predatory. So if they're not already in your watershed, don't put them there. But yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the other thing that I've found with aquaponics that when we've done it for trials is just that it does consume electricity. So unless you've got it on alternative energy, you're gonna have to pay for the power. That would be my concern about that.
And we had a next question from Lyman and Nikki. Are there serious efforts to use gray water in aquaculture?
It's very common in Asia. I don't know about here in Hawaii and how much the water would actually have to be treated. So I don't know anything about that in Hawaii.
And I think, not to down on people, but sometimes they have a misconception of what gray water is. They confuse gray water with black water. The water that comes out of your washing machine, that's called black water. It's not gray water. A lot of people will mistake it. Oh, I run my gray water into my bananas from my washing machine. I'm like, yo, man, black water. And the way to think about it is gray water has not touched a human being and black water has touched a human. That's how I explain it to people. If it has touched a human being hand, even soaps or anything like that, it can be potentially harmful to go into the environment. So that becomes black water. Gray water has just never been touched. The next one, Tefi Tech. I'm planning to construct several fish ponds on an 84-acre property in the Makakilo area. Do you have any information on construction companies that specialize in that?
Ooh, that's a toughie. I don't know anybody that's very specialized in building ponds. Maybe somebody else does. It might be more of a question of making sure you have the right kind of engineer, that you're designing the ponds correctly before you can get the construction guys involved. Because one of the big construction mistakes with ponds is they make them so they don't drain. They absolutely have to be able to drain them dry. I don't know. I could ask around, but that's a good question.
Is that something that might be those concerns when you're building? Do you think that would be covered in the workshops that we've got coming up?
Yeah, Kevin Fitzsimmons is definitely going to cover that. There's also questions about the soil. So if you have really sandy soil, for example, either you have to seal it or use pond liners. And so you basically what you do is you go around and do cores to see what the sediment layers are like in that area you're going to build. Because it's not always uniform. But I think in Hawaii you're going to have a lot of problems with sand. But Kevin will cover some of those basic things, although he wouldn't necessarily know the particular construction company to look for.
And then the next question from Anissa. Do you need permits to build and dig a pond?
I know lots of people who've built ponds without them, but they're mostly the small backyard kinds. Oh yeah, Joyce, go ahead. Mr. Mai?
Sharmaya?
Okay, can you hear me? Sorry it took so long.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can, depending on what kind of ponds you're building, if you're building above ground ponds, I wouldn't hire a construction company. There's information out there where you can build your own ponds out of a variety of materials. And the easiest thing to build a pond with, I think for me in my experience, is plywood and plastic liner. Those are the easiest and cheapest ponds that you can build. And from my experience, they also last a very long time. So I've used two kinds of ponds. plastic lined ponds that I've made out of plywood. And then I've had high density polyethylene tanks that were welded that I made. And the wooden ones actually lasted 3 times longer than the other ones from my experience. So that's the advice I can give you. And then, you know, on the Big Island, there are several places and guys that sell catchment tanks and other tanks, and those are great tanks to use for aquaculture, especially the steel ones.
Yeah, that's good advice. But if you're going to dig a pond, I think the permit's going to depend on the size of the pond and where you're located. If you really want to do something large, you might end up having to do some kind of environmental assessment.
Yeah, the permits go according to how much earth you're going to move, you know. So the volume of earth you're going to move, you'll have to find out whether or not you'll need a permit. If it's a small, shallow pond, you know, I don't think a permit is needed. And then it depends on your zoning and on where you live and where you're building the pond too. Yeah, because if you're in a residential area, a lot of places you can't build large ponds. So, but if you're out in a farm, you know, I don't think that'll be a problem.
Isn't
might be able
Rhiannon,
to- Sorry.
isn't Rhiannon going to cover quite a bit on the permitting?
Yeah, I don't know how much she was planning to get on the ponds, but I'll make a note of that so she can look into it. I think the other problem is going to be like if you need to drain your pond, that's a whole different set of legal considerations.
Okay, so the next one is, does anyone on the panel know about or have experience with solar wells to provide water for fish ponds in Hawaii? Like solar powered wells?
I don't have any experience with that. Maybe somebody else does.
Neither do I. Maybe a solar powered pump to pump the water out of the wall.
I've tried a solar powered well pump before, and I actually bought one to try. I really didn't get to try it because it doesn't have a long run. The one that I bought didn't have a long running time. So a lot of the solar powered pumps, they don't have the commercial ability to pump constantly and be used in a commercial setting when you're raising fish. In a small setting, I think you can run a solar powered equipment, but to find solar powered pumps that can handle the amount of time and effort needed for commercial use or maybe farming, you might want to go with direct current or find a way to convert your solar system into direct current and use a pump with direct current.
That's one of the questions we're looking to answer with our research at Maona is how many panels, how many batteries to what size pump to the volume of water going through is optimal. So we'll be experimenting with different power options. Because right now we run everything on one panel, one battery, one pump. But that over the long, once our fish densities increase, that will become not optimal.
Correct.
But I'm very, very excited about avoiding the electricity bill because we could pipe in electricity, but I don't wanna. I want to see if it can be done catchment with all renewable energy sources. So I'm very excited. Again, another piece of the adult Legos. What about windmills? Yes. Or water mills. This is my thinking. I want to hook up a hydroelectric turbine, well, not a huge turbine, but a wheel to my grow bin outflows before it hits back into the water. So I can passively collect electricity. Again, adult Legos. This is the nerdy kind of stuff that keeps me up at night. Like how can we passively, so the city of Portland has now put turbines inside of their wastewater. They're large wastewater tubes And they're generating electricity off of their sewers and water lines because they can. When I saw an article about that, I got very excited. I thought, well, how can I passively be collecting many different ways? Because we do have non-sunny days. We do have non-windy days. So we want to be able to hedge our bets by be collecting and storing electricity a bunch of different ways. So adult Legos.
Yeah, I like the windmill question though too, because especially on the mainland, you go to the northwest or Midwest, every single farm's got a windmill on their pump. And when we're right next to the ocean, I always thought our aquaculture center needed some alternative energy like that.
Oh, what is my site is in Honau now in South Kona, and it's called Mauna Community Garden. We're on Instagram and Facebook. I'll type it in. My people, it's we only have a few more minutes left of the amazing Dr. Haas. Ask the questions.
I think I have more questions for people than they have for me at this point. It's been great to get all these good questions and kind of get to know who's in your union since I just joined.
Oh, why Manalo Feed Supplies sells tanks? Oh, all right.
I have to say your place is so impressive, Chantal. I want to get back over there whenever I can.
It's so fun. It's like a big, I guess I love it so much because I can go and try out all these different things. Like there's only so far you can get by reading or looking at videos. You gotta, like bell siphons. I figured out a whole nother way to make bell siphons out of Coke bottles. It was great. And then the size of the hole on the bottom of the bell siphon versus the size of the outflow. It's fun.
Well, maybe one thing to mention before we start winding down is there is actually a Hawaii Aquaculture and Aquaponics Association, HAAA. They haven't been doing much during COVID, but normally we have an annual aquaculture conference where all the producers, students, everybody goes. I think we're going to try to get it going sometime later this year. But they also have a lot of, I would say probably around 100 regular members that if you're interested, you can join up and they'll let you pick their brains. Get a lot of experience in that association.
Link in the chat.
Yep, thanks. And Ron Weidenbach, who's the president, actually has a pretty large fish farm over on Oahu in a quarry, an old quarry pit. But he's also a tank distributor. So if you have tanks you can't get locally, he can get them from the mainland for you, like some of the larger plastic tanks. But as Shamai was saying earlier, you can fabricate your own plastic tanks if you have a plastic welder. You can buy the material and fabricate your own tanks. So that's another inexpensive way to go.
And there are a couple of farmers I know that just reset their old rainwater catchment tanks to being fish tanks. Waiea Aquaponics did it that way. And I mean, how many of us have catchment tanks on Hawaii Island? So many. Oh wait, 60,000 people have catchment tanks. So yeah.
Hey, hi folks. My name is Dave. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm with Congressman Kailihi Kahele in Washington, D.C. Hi, Chantal.
Hi.
And Maria and everybody else. And I was just, enjoying the conversation, but I did want to just share that we are in the middle of appropriations, okay? And we have the Farm Bill coming up in 2023. So I am always looking for opportunities to help grow out the aquaponics, aquaculture side of the equation. Having talked to Dean Comerford a lot and Marissa Walls at T-Bark a lot, and many other folks, they say, hey, this is one area, aquaponics / aquaculture, that really is an untapped potential for Hawaii. So I'm going to put my email and phone number in the chat, and, please reach out if you have great ideas or if you would like to help develop policy. Mind you, the policy is more at the national level, so rather than the state or local level. So it will take a little time to filter out if federal programs are for the long, the 5-10 year cycle, rather than state or county programs in the 1 to 2, 3 year kind of cycle. So, but I'm happy to follow up and listen, and then help you folks craft policy that might be beneficial for Hawaii and the Pacific Islands. So thank you very much.
And Dr. Hawes is the best person to talk to about that. She has international experience, regional and national. She's seen aquaculture all around the globe. So that would be your expert right there.
That's terrific, and since with that background, Maria, so we are working on the reauthorization of the Global Food Security Act. Okay, and one of the components inside there, and I'm working very closely with the World Coffee Research Organization, is to ensure that 20% of the funding that goes to the reauthorization is going to ag research, with ag, just be the general umbrella for livestock, aquaculture and things like that. So, we can talk offline, or have another talk story, and I can, brief you on that. Since you brought up Chantal, you brought up that Maria is, global. So, okay.
No, thank you. That's really informative. And if anybody ever wants to come visit, of course, they're more than welcome. But, honestly, I think one thing that we really need for food security is research is great. I mean, I'm a researcher, but we got to get money to the farmers. The more support and money we get to the farmers, that's where you're really going to see food production. And I think especially small farmers, I'm pretty well hooked up with some of the farm credit services and some of the other folks on the mainland, but if you're not a big farmer, it's really hard to get support, even in Hawaii. All the state programs we used to have to support small farmers, a lot of them have dried up. And I think particularly for the aquaculture sector, if you're an aquaculture farmer in Hawaii, it's almost impossible to get the support you need. So anything that can be done to kind of trickle that down, I think would be really helpful here in Hawaii.
Okay, well, I'm glad you brought that up, Maria, because, so, just to carve out the federal level, which it moves like slower than a snail sometimes. So one of the big focuses I have going on right now in the food production side is technical assistance. Okay, so let me flip to the county and the state side. If one of the biggest things I think that folks like you could help with, is lobbying your state ledge and your county council members and mayors, the importance of having procurement administrators and grant writers, or in other words, grant administrators and grant writers. The state of Hawaii and county governments are sorely lacking. So we can do all we want at the, we can do a lot at the federal level. And in fact, I'm sending out a note on the Beginning Ranches Farmers Program, that was just announced today, 35 mil. But through my 23 years up on the Hill, the delegation can do a lot of door openings, but we can't lead people to apply for the grants. And that's why I've emphasized technical assistance on my side. And all our reach outs, including with the Congressman Kahele, talking with the state ledge members that he's known, that, if anything, you gotta prioritize folks who know how to write grants at the Hawaii Department of Ag, DOH, and more.
I
So
found
very good point.
in the past, a lot of extension, that was a part of the extension service. And over the last few years, we've seen our university extension services be kneecapped, for lack of a better word, because they're having their funding cut left and right. Institutional funding for these essential positions is falling faster than a comet through the sky. you've got a lot of extension agents and extension staff who would normally be performing this function in their communities. They're on soft money, which means they're out there grant writing to even keep their positions. Whereas the pool of institutional money is drying up so quickly. Some are down to less than 30% institutional hard funds. So that means they're spending, they're trying to get 60% of their funding, and they're constantly grant writing. It feels very entrepreneurial. Feels like I'm constantly hunting. I don't know if Dr. Haas is nodding, but we're constantly hunting from grant to grant and going for these short-term, and their short-term projects are wonderful. But if it were to be a priority in the state to support extension in providing those essential services to the community, the grant writing, the technical assistance, that is what extension does.
And one recommendation, if I may throw in, and I'd like to hear all of your feedback, is what I have been, as a staffer for the congressman, what I have been trying to do, you know, a one-to-one relationships with folks at the Hawaii County, Maui County in particular, is to get them to carve out a small bit of money to hire 1 or 2 extension agents in for Maui County and Hawaii County. So that's me behind the scenes operating, okay? But I share that with you because if I'm doing that behind the scenes quietly, I mean, you guys can do it the same thing, you know, to organize into a group or individually. Talk to the mayor of, you know, the different islands, okay, whichever island you're from, and talk about the importance of extension and say, hey, let's do a pilot program. Let's see how it works. 3 years. You set aside $250 for one extension agent or an extension agent and an assistant. Let's see how that works. So that's something, a very direct action you can take.
Oh,
So
I make noise.
that at the federal level is high on the priority list for the congressman. But again, that and technical assistance, but again, you know, that's at the federal level. If folks at the local level don't go after these things, you know, I mean, then it goes to another state.
I think we're lucky in Hawaii County. We have had a lot of support lately for trying to get support for aquaculture and ag. So I think getting stuff to the county level is really important. So
Yeah.
Thanks for the words of advice.
Yeah. So you have a great grant. What's his name over at the I forget, economic development. He's retired military. Anyway,
Oh,
yes, great
Douglas
people.
Adams.
What's that?
Retired Lieutenant Colonel Douglas Adams. Yes.
Yeah, Doug. Yeah.
He's the one that spurred us all on, he and Sarah Friedman, to apply for the Economic Development Agency's Build Back Better. And he pushes us. He really pushes the coalition forming and the partnerships. Oh my gosh, I've never been pushed so hard ever. But he's got a whole lot of diverse stakeholders and organizations working together to create systemic change. And extension is a part of that application. So fingers crossed, people do March 15th.
And when I filled out that survey that he circulated, my top 3 priorities was extension, and then the suggestion that the county set aside funding for two extension agents for Hawaii Island, you know, by itself. So, but I'm here to, you know, continue a conversation. I don't want to take away from the main conversation tonight, but thank you.
Well, this is kind of the elephant in the room, you know, conversation is how we're telling people to get started with aquaculture and aquaponics, but if the technical assistance isn't available, like we've got the Beginning Farmer Rancher, and there'll be online resources that we're going to make available, but there's got to be that support. So often aquaculture and aquaponics operators get started, and Marie even said it earlier, that they're they've got their systems and then they're abandoned after a bit because it just got to be too much and there wasn't that support that was there for them.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's going to be long-term support because, for example, we got super lucky with getting this beginning farmers and ranchers grant, but it's 2 years. You know, that's just barely time for us to support somebody to kind of get up and start it and maybe see a harvest. You know, we need more of a, I think, solid stream of funding for all these extension activities.
Can
No,
I
thank
say
you.
something? Hello, can I say something? Yeah, Dr. Haas, your pitch for the Hawaii Aquaculture and Aquaponics Association, they're working right now with Sea Grant trying to push legislation forward to start getting more support for aquaculture in Hawaii. I mean, we're really lacking in that aspect. So I'm pushing for Hawaii Aquaculture and Aquaponics Association, and I hope that everyone who's on this Zoom meeting joins the Hawaii Aquaculture and Aquaponics Association, because we need a voice out in the legislature, and they are our voice for aquaculture. We have all the big hitters from that in aquaculture on board with Hawaii Aquaculture and Aquaponics Association, and we've been pushing all of government every year, and it's a great entity for you to learn. We have workshops available once a year where we do aquaponics workshops. We had Dr. Rikosi come to Hilo once, and he did a workshop there many years ago. So there are a lot of good things that come out of that Hawaii Aquaculture and Aquaponics Association, and I hope that everyone here can email them and join up, because we all need a big voice upstairs, and because for years and years we haven't been heard. And one thing I want to tell everyone, which is really important, and especially Dave, yeah, you know, the World Health Organization stated that by 2030, 2/3 of the world's seafood supply will be farm raised. Yeah, we're only 9 years away from that. And Hawaii, we need seafood, and it's not going to be there. We're late getting on board, and we got a lot of catching up to do. That's what I have to say. So everyone here, I want to put in a plug for Hawaii Aquaculture and Aquaponics Association, and ask that everyone join and support our efforts in moving aquaculture in all aquaculture in Hawaii, local IA, you know, Kona, Nela, and Maria Haas and her oysters, and everyone in Hawaii. You know, we need that support. Thank you.
And I gotta say it, Sea Grant rules. But to draw attention to the post, Teffy Tech had posted it, and then David, thank you for reposting. There's a link in the chat for the USDA.gov partnership for socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers, and that's another great resource. But I think, oh, there's more questions. Are fish ponds considered separate from aquaculture?
No, they're definitely part of aquaculture.
Okay, and Katie, how are we doing on time? I don't want to keep people. I know there's so many questions.
Yeah, we could wrap things up pretty soon.
Are there any other burning questions? Got like 2 more questions, and we got to wrap it up. Oh, we're good. Last chance. Going once, going twice. Well, to end it up, I wanted to give a sincere thank you to Dr. Haas for sharing all of your experience and knowledge with us, and also for all the wonderful work that you do with Sea Grant and with UH Hilo and PACRC, and your commitment to helping our community get started with aquaculture and keep it going. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for spending so much time with Farmers Union tonight.
No, thanks to you guys for inviting me, and thanks for letting me join up with y'all. Hopefully I'll get to know you more in the future, but I appreciate the chance to come and meet everybody. And thanks for all the great questions. This has been fun.
Thank
Farmers
you.
Union is fun.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Good night.